Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being present here today, and I hope you will have the benefit of an interesting panel discussion on a topic that is extremely important today. As you heard the minister say, India is today the fifth largest economy in the world in terms of total GDP. It's another matter that in terms of per capita GDP, we are still well behind, but in terms of total GDP, we are not a country to be taken lightly anymore. We are the fifth largest country. And most economists have predicted that by 2030, we'll probably become the third largest economy in the world. We are the largest, or the fastest growing economy today amongst leading big economies in the world today. We are the most populous country in the world. And we are expected to have the largest population in the age group of 20 to 60, the age group which normally spends a lot of money for many years to come, our demographic dividend as they call it. However, India's share in global trade today is only approximately 3 to 4%. So in spite of being such a large economy, our share in global trade is only 3 to 4%. EU is the highest in the global trade, accounting for 16% of global trade. For India, EU is the second largest or the third largest trading partner with about 11% share. But for EU, India is the 10th largest trading partner with only about 2% share. So you can see that there are still gaps that are available as opportunities for India to fill in the future. Recent geopolitical events in North Asia and East Europe have also increased the attractiveness of India today as a destination for global supply chains. On the technology front, EU is a major investor in India with over 6,000 European companies present in India in a wide range of sectors, providing direct and indirect employment to over 10 million people. However, even though foreign direct investment in India by EU is increasing, it pales in comparison to what investments have been attracted by countries like China and Brazil. The movement of talent between India and EU has been instrumental in fostering cultural enrichment and professional growth. India is well known for its skilled workforce. Again, you heard the minister say that in terms of the number of engineers we churn out every year. And many students from India pursue higher education in European universities. It is in the context of this background, also with India having just finished its G20 presidency, it's India's diplomatic efforts towards promoting world peace. All these are events that have further improved the stature of India today in the global environment. In the backdrop of this macro environment, we have a very distinguished panel here today with us to discuss and share their views on how they see trade, technology, and talent provide a platform for a transformational expansion of EU-India cooperation. The way this panel discussion has been structured, we will have about 50 minutes of discussion at the panel level, and then there is an opportunity for questions to be asked by all of you. We've left about 15-20 minutes for that as well. So we wanted to make it a little interactive with you also being able to participate. So without further ado, I will set the ball rolling. The first question is a question that is open to all the panelists. India-EU trade ties have been increasing. The last decade saw trade between the two economies increase by 30%. Yet, as we saw, India is only the 10th largest trading partner for EU and barely accounts for 2 to 3% of EU's international trade. Yet, this time around, there is a lot of optimism in the air that ties between the two is set to grow meaningfully in the future. While we will discuss more aspects of this in detail, I request each one of the panelists to state just one or two factors that gives rise to this optimism this time. So what they think, why is it that everybody says that India-EU relations are at the cusp or an inflection point where things are likely to meaningfully develop going forward?
Thank you, Mr. Srinivas, and a very good evening to everyone here. I think to your question, there are several themes playing out from the fact that India has become a very attractive emerging destination for manufacturing and investment with the enabling policies that are being put in place and the simplification of procedures, to the fact that there is a demographic situation playing out on both sides of the equation in EU and in India, which is actually quite complementary, to the fact that India is now seeing advancement in sectors which could potentially have commercial and strategic interests for the EU, like renewable energy, engineering, infrastructure, and of course the fallout of the post-pandemic era in terms of the need for supply chain resilience and supply chain diversification. So these are all new developments, and if I may add, fairly compelling new aspects which were not there 10 years back. And therefore, I think this will lead to some favorable outcomes given, the situation and the whole, construct that we are working within. So those are my views.
Thank you. See, I look at it this way. EU is already our third largest partner. It's only China and US. It's very difficult for EU to go from third to second to one. Lot of hard work. But as far as India is concerned, we are 10th largest for EU. So we have all the way to go up. So that's a positive side. That potential is immense. I think the time has just about come. If you look at EU's major partners, recent geopolitical changes which have happened, and I need not name them, everybody understands, that should help us in both China plus one strategy, and perhaps we can also talk about Russia plus two strategy. In both the context, it will be India whose share of EU-India trade or EU's global trade will grow. That gives me number one perspective on this matter. Second perspective, because you said please try to mention two factors. After geopolitical situation, second factor is changing profile of EU. This changing profile of EU is that, like elsewhere in the world, percentage of people who are going out of working population is growing across the EU. And as you rightly pointed out, India is in a happy situation to complement that. During my work visits all over Europe, and I have worked with the largest corporations, their CEOs and chairmen, in France, Germany, Czech, Italy, Spain. What I'm seeing is constraints are being felt in manufacturing sector due to availability of skilled manpower. It's increasingly being felt. And India is in a position to supplement. So first, geopolitical situation, and second, manpower situation. These two factors should help us in moving up. From 10th, we can only go up. We can't go down. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The question is that what are those few factors? And I do understand you said two, but I would mention three factors which will make us, India, extremely competitive to an EU buyer. Think, whenever you buy something internationally, wherever you buy from anywhere in the world, there are three factors a businessman looks at. First, cost. It has to be cost effective. Second, quality. The quality cannot be compromised. And third, on time, timeliness. India is in such a position today to not only compete globally, very cost effective. Of course, China was always noted to be the most cost effective source. No longer it is, because Chinese wages have now surpassed that of India significantly over the last several years. Quality consciousness, I think Indian manufacturers have become very quality conscious, and because of billions of dollars being placed on infrastructure, our ability to supply on time because of better logistics available in the country has significantly improved. So I believe cost effectiveness, quality, being quality conscious, and right quality every time. And number 3, timeliness will make us a global powerhouse. Very soon, if not already we are.
Thank you. Good evening to everyone, and my pleasure to join the co-panelists here. I know you've all mentioned, quite a few reasons which actually make India a very attractive destination, whether it is in terms of investments, whether it is in terms of progressing a partnership with India, and I'm completely aligned with all of that. At the risk of sort of not repeating, maybe there are 2 points that I'll mention where I think we also need to, focus on, and what is actually important in terms of taking this, EU-India partnership forward. And there are, I would mention 2 points. One is that, there are areas where there's a lot of complementarity, and I think all eyes down, we're already seeing progress and revival of sort of talks on the EU FTA. And I think that's going to be a very important piece in this, in the EU-India partnership going forward, because their complementarities, whether it comes to, EU is particularly strong on high-tech manufacturing, luxury car segment. India provides a great market for some of those areas. India, on the other hand, particularly strong in terms of, we've talked about technology, agri, a lot of those aspects, which again, so there's complementarity in how the two regions can take this forward, and having a strong sort of FTA always has helped. It's helped us with a lot of other countries as well. So that, I think, is going to be an important element to watch. The second is just in terms of focus on areas of partnership, whether it is AI digitization, healthcare sector, also just supply chain resilience, which I'm sure is going to be a key element, as India is now providing a very strong alternative, as you mentioned, to North Asia and East Europe. These are factors that are going to be very important, and if we're able to unlock the potential for the two areas actually collaborating together on these, I think it can be very powerful for both.
Hi, good evening, everyone. And thank you so much. Specifically to your question, actually, Mr. Moli, so the numbers for healthcare, fortunately, are a little different. About one third of all APIs sold in Europe come from India. And 1/3 of medical device imports in India come from the EU. So you can imagine the kind of strength of partnership that exists between, especially when it comes to healthcare. At the same time, I see even more, optimism going ahead because of 2 factors. I think the first is, so while a lot of pharma companies have anyways very productive partnerships with a lot of Indian companies, especially when it comes to R&D, when it comes to local innovation. At the same time, 2 developments have happened. The first is the amended free trade agreement, which Piyush Goyal also mentioned. And in this free trade agreement, there is going to be enhanced cooperation on a lot of tech transfer when it comes to manufacturing of a lot of APIs. Both the partners are trying to reduce dependence on China, just to be honest. And this kind of collaboration is going to be very, very useful. The second factor which is going to be is, I think there's a lot of progressive discussions around the factor of intellectual property rights, intellectual protection, etc. And IPR honestly has been a bone of contention between both the partners from a long period of time. especially with us having across the process innovation kind of a regime, whereas all our EU partners want across a product regime happening. Fortunately, there have been a lot of progressive discussions on that. A resolution and a white paper is expected over the next about 2 months, and I think that should be one of the key factors that should also propel even more, I would say, trade relationships across both the partners to happen. But I think, definitely better days to come, Mr. Modi.
So interesting that you mentioned about the free trade agreement. That was my next question, and I will address this to Robin Banerjee. EU and India talks over a free trade agreement have been going on and off for a long time now. In fact, talks had stalled in 2013, but they have restarted now in right earnest in 2022 with a very ambitious target to conclude by 2023 or early 2024. And while we do not want to get into a political debate on this here, do you think that from a purely economic rationale, in an increasingly polarized world, this agreement is now important enough for both sides to find a quick resolution? Robin, your views? And then if any other panelist member wants to also talk on this, because this is a very interesting topic. So I will first ask Robin and then anybody else who wants to talk as well on that.
Perhaps the most vexed issue between EU and India, or India and EU, is the FTA, which is called the Free Trade Agreement. What does a free trade agreement mean? Free trade agreement means that imports to any country, into India from Europe, or imports into India, into Europe from India, are free of import duty. Almost free of import duty. There would be some exceptions, which I will explain. It would also mean there are no non-tariff barriers. And this must be explained to you. Believe me, I don't want to become the commerce minister handling this today. And I'll explain why. Why this FTA is not being signed? It is in the cards. It's on the cards for decades now. Then they gave up for about 9 years. We restarted. 7 meetings have happened. I don't think we are anywhere close by. Now, let me tell you, just time being short, 2 or 3 examples. What does Europe want India to do? Europe wants India to import, free of duty, beer, wine, cheese, Gouda cheese, feta cheese, luxury cars. Now, wine in India is subjected to 150% import duty. Beer, 150% import duty. Luxury cars, 70% import duty. Gouda cheese, feta cheese, the best cheese in the world, as you know, it's manufactured made in Holland, subject to 30% import duty. Now, if I'm an Indian manufacturer, I'm the owner of Sula Vineyard, I want my Sula wine made in Nashik, Maharashtra, to be sold. Now, if my imports from Europe is not subject to 150%, Indians are going to drink imported wine and not Sula wine anymore. Therefore, if I'm the commerce minister, how do I make imports of beer 0% import duty? Heineken, for instance, is more expensive than Kingfisher because it is subjected to 100% import duty. If it is imported, most of it is not. It's all now made in India, as you know. Now, what is it that Europe is doing? So Europe wants us to import these. So Europe has therefore levied import duty on many of the products, and India wants to export steel, stainless steel, aluminium, chemicals, fertilizers. These are all subjected to about 12% import duty. Now, because my steel has 12% import duty into Europe, Europe is sourcing that steel from Russia or Kazakhstan and not buying from India. If it has become 0% import duty, immediately Indian steel becomes competitive. Therefore, in order to protect our own industry, make in India movement, in some areas, if the moment we make it a duty-free, what happens to these industries in India? It's nice to talk, but think of the conundrum which our leadership is going through. Now, the second more important issue is Europe is now become very climate sensitive, as you know, sustainable energy. So they've brought in a law called CBAM. I don't know how many of you have heard. It is Carbon Border Agreement Maintenance, which means that if any product which is manufactured in India, let's talk India, Europe only, is consuming carbon dioxide, they are not going to allow that to be imported into Europe, or is going to have an extra import duty between 12 and 14% because of CBAM. What happens in India? An Indian manufacturer, on an average, for every 1 ton of steel, consumes 2.6 tons of carbon dioxide, which is CO2. 2.6 tons. No steel in the world can be manufactured without CO2 generation. The average CO2 generation in an European plant is 2.6 tons per ton of steel. Average is 2.3 tons of CO2 per ton of steel. That means we have to consume less carbon dioxide, which means we have to burn less coal in our furnaces, cannot burn furnace oil in our furnaces. If I can't burn furnace oil, if I can't burn coal, how the hell am I going to make my steel in my furnace? My blast furnace has already cost hundreds of crores. How do I do that? Come 1st of January 2026, our imports into Europe will be 12 to 14% more expensive, and we can forget about many of our imports or exports from India. Now, therefore, this is a very, very difficult issue. Very difficult issue in the sense that the moment there is an FTA, there are hundreds and thousands of Indian manufacturers who are going up in arms, who are importing or import dependent or protecting imports. As I said, the liquor manufacturers or car manufacturers. Will this happen in the short term? I know all of us have said FTA need to happen. Commerce Minister just now said FTA we're discussing. My personal hunch is it's not going to happen in the immediate future. In fact, contrary to all what we talk about, openness and so on and so forth, I think for the time being, in order to make or protect Make in India movement, we need a few years more to make her more competitive. As I said, we need the cost, quality and timeliness, which we are there, to save some of the industry and have this Make in India movement a little more. To cut the long story short, the matter is very, very serious, very inclusive. No one solution is coming. There is no one solution fits all. And therefore, I think we are a few years away from it.
Anybody else from the panel?
I agree with the last few lines of conclusion. It will take a while. Nascent industries, even in economics is taught, they need some years of looking after by the host country. That invariably happens. If you are growing a sapling, the sapling needs protection for some time till it has grown enough that goats and sheep will not come and eat it away. So that is likely to happen. Few years, perhaps it will take on both sides. But as we have areas of trade, technology and talent, I do believe that technology and talent are the areas where both EU and India will see immediate rewards, immediate benefits. And on trade part, perhaps it will be a little longer process. That's what I believe.
I forgot one. I must mention, in one of these disputes, what Europe wants is to import, what India wants to export. I said, what India wants to import, wine, beer, and so on and so forth. India wants to export human talent. India wants free visas, technicians to be given work permits and staying permits, and that's what India demand is. India wants to export talent, and in fact, that is one of our topic, and therefore, thank you, sir, for reminding that.
Yeah, so as I said, this is a very delicate issue. It is, and that is why trade talks on the FTA have broken off for the last so many years. However, recent events that have happened globally, especially the China +1 strategy, the Russia-Ukraine war that led to, therefore, Russia stopping energy supplies to Europe, etc. This has made, hopefully, possibility of finding a solution that is a midway path between what the two nations or the two regions want. So I feel that there could be possibly some softening of demands from the EU side and some maybe relaxation from the Indian side as well. One of the evidence of that is the setting up of this Trade and Technology Council that Piyush Goyal also spoke about, which is a very high-level ministerial committee set up by both EU and India to carry forward. And I'll come back to the Trade and Technology Council in a little bit more detail going forward. But I'm a little bit more hopeful that because of geopolitical events, because of COVID kind of situation, de-risking strategies have now started to be thought of by Europe in a much more serious way. And I'm hopeful that therefore some breakthrough will happen in this FTA discussions. Maybe not as early as end 2023, as has been said publicly. That is the aim, but probably maybe in another couple of years. But yes, it is a delicate issue. Question for you, madam. You are from the trade finance, and India has long been recognized as a powerhouse in the IT software services and has made huge strides in digitalization, a shining example of which is India's digital payment system UPI, whose total value of transactions now exceeds the combined digital payments of USA, UK, Germany, and France put together. How do you see advancements in trade and supply chain digitalization as an enabler to simplify and grow bilateral trade between India and the EU?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think if you look at what has been put together under what is called the India Stack, clearly it has led to significant innovation, digitalization, enhanced efficiency and convenience, not just for the retail segment, but also for corporate segment as well. If you look at large manufacturing houses, and we do have a lot of European companies in India who are into manufacturing, it's far easier today to manage the supplier base and effectively actually support the supplier base with digital solutions, not just in terms of the instant payment system, but also using the India Stack and leveraging on some of its components, which is the identity layer broadly for suppliers to get onboarded more quickly with their financiers, to look at the consent-based public data available for them to get actually rated and given some access to capital, which was difficult earlier, because now you have the transparency and the digital sort of stack there. So that's become much easier, and therefore, the whole piece around supply chain has become far more transparent and visible. And clearly, financiers who are able to sort of help corporates achieve their objectives are the ones who are able to offer absolutely seamless and digital solutions. So I think there is definitely a great sort of opportunity there for companies to actually be able to transform the way they look at their supply chains, not just in terms of supporting the suppliers, because if you look at European countries and the taxonomy that's going to play out in terms of sustainability directives and scope 3 emissions, to be able to have that visibility within the supply chain is going to become more and more critical, and digitalization and technology will definitely have a role to play there. Equally, when you come to cross-border trade, I think it's been many, many years that people have been talking about adopting greater digital technologies to reduce transaction costs. But I feel that now is that inflection point when all the parties who are involved in trade transactions are actually open to and are working towards increasing digital adoption. If you look at end-to-end technologies like blockchain, they can significantly reduce your transaction as well as realization timeframes. APIs and not the pharma APIs, the tech APIs I think are being used quite significantly now to actually make communication and transactional ease far more instant than it has been. So clearly, I think there is a lot that's happening on digitalization, and it's only going to serve to make both exporters and importers on either side far more competitive and efficient.
Anybody else would like to add something? So actually, India probably can even export its little bit of technology around what it has done in terms of digitalization. I mean, what we have achieved in the past few years has been nothing short of phenomenal. A question for you, Ms. Kocher, and I'm sure a lot of the audience here would like to hear from you. What are the lessons for Indian SMEs from the successful European SME businesses? And we can take as an example German family businesses that I think you have been associated a lot with, especially given the focus on the Make in India initiative. So can we learn something from what they have achieved? And I'm sure you have things to share on that.
Sure. So, the German small to mid enterprise, the Mittelstand as they're referred to, they've actually, and most of these are family owned. They form almost over 90% of German enterprise, are responsible for north of 60% of the exports. A lot of the work that happens in these are oftentimes high-tech manufacturing, strong, backed by strong innovation. And the German government, and we've seen that in Switzerland, Austria as well, have actually created a very supportive ecosystem around it, right? Which is in terms of promoting academic research, institutions, market development, financing, manpower. So there's a whole ecosystem that's encouraged. And just taking some of the learnings from that as we think about Make in India and what has happened out there. And I remember, I think this was 2015 or 16, something like that, where India had also set up a Make in India Middleton's desk, which was primarily to encourage that entire ecosystem to form partnerships and invest in India. And it had been quite successful for a while. Of course, it again sort of lost steam a bit. But in terms of, a lot of the Indian ecosystem as we see right now, a lot of small to mid-market, and particularly in the last 2 or 3 years with Make in India, with, buoyant capital markets, with private equity investment coming in, increased FDI, and all the aspects around, supply chain diversification, we're seeing that sort of, tail in the winds for a lot of small to mid-market enterprises in India. And a lot of these have been traditional family-owned businesses, next generation coming in. And, in our business, we see a lot of that particular ecosystem coming in, sort of saying, either the next generation's coming, we need to think about professionalization for us to be competitive. So there's a lot to be learned from some of the lessons that how that ecosystem has been supported and how they continue to operate, many of them still where there's family-owned but professionally managed businesses. And how do you set up, whether it is governance, how do you set up decision-making, separation of, decisions when it comes to capital allocation, shareholding, versus actually operating in strategic discussions. And that in terms of, we were talking about talent. Yes, one is, of course, visas and our people, but the other aspect around talent is just this knowledge sharing on how do you develop an ecosystem, very much that has worked pretty well for that particular market. And, that is something where we've been doing a lot of work on, and we feel quite sort of positive about, some of the learnings that we have from that ecosystem.
Would somebody else want to share their views as well on this, some experiences?
So maybe just to add to Ritu's point, so there is a joint kind of a statement which is on the agenda of migration and mobility between actually EU and India, and this amazing document actually speaks a lot about not just migration, but also about transfers. It speaks about readmissions, returns. It speaks about education management, etc., across both the countries. Honestly, I think a lot of what it says is still on paper and hasn't been really fructified, and that's where I think a lot of work can be done. Uh, you know, I think one of the reasons why healthcare is a little more optimistic or progressive is because there is already a lot of cross-pollination that happens. And it happens because of actually three reasons. The first is, I think, EU's growing realization of an aging population. First, the increasing costs out there, and the scarcity of qualified eligible manpower, which has been a realization post-COVID. Because I think every country has realized that the capacities and capabilities that they had were just not sufficient. And I think this is where India can play across a significant role. There's already a kind of a committee, a working group, which was discussed in the B20 of how a lot of talent management can happen between both partners, especially when it comes to medical manpower, that is doctors, moving across both partners, because there's a lot of medical knowledge out here. At the same time, EU also needs support when it comes to other care structures. For example, nursing, which is a very big domain, and EU is short of that. Whereas India, we are very, very fortunate to have across a lot of qualified manpower. And I think that's where a lot of things can happen. Also to Ritu's, point, a lot of SMEs around India have started home care services. And I think which is another amazing domain, not just within the country, but also in actually EU, where insurance plays across a large role, and people are looking for the entire spectrum, right from detection to cure and care, happening within the confines of their own home. And I think that's where I think a lot of cross-pollination of talent is really expected to happen. So yes, I think we are a little more optimistic.
It's very interesting, actually. So there are not only things that we can learn from the EU, but there are things that they can learn from us as well. And that's the whole talent exchange program that we are talking about. Having said that, I think one area that we as India, as a country, should learn also from the EU and from the Western world is this emphasis on quality, processes, and R&D. As a country, we spend too little on R&D. We spend just 0.7% of GDP on R&D. We believe more in the jugaad, I guess. But if you really want to make sustainable progress, you need to spend on R&D. The advanced countries generally work at an average of about 2.8 to 3% of GDP. Israel, for example, works at 4.8% of GDP. India is at 0.7%. So this is an area, the emphasis on quality, emphasis on processes, professionalization of management. These are all things that we can learn from the EU countries as well. Mr. Shukla, you are an expert in defense and aerospace. How do you see technology as different from simply trading as being a critical fulcrum for EU-India cooperation going forward, considering that thus far India has been known to be more of an importer of technology rather than a significant exporter of technology, except software services? Do you think this exchange of technology transfer between India and EU will get more balanced going forward? That we will not just be importing technology, but also exporting technology?
Very interesting question. Yes, I have been TTT, Tire, Telecom and Tanks. So that's fair. So if we talk about last decade and a half, since we opened the defense sector to private industry, I've been there from the beginning, and that's what I like. And we did not have defense outside of DPSUs, public sector companies. So most Indian companies began by seeking collaborations, cooperations, technology transfers. That was the natural route. And that is where we did scouting around the world, that who will make good partners. Most of the technology came, if you see, 5 Security Council members, the winners of the Second World War. Losers of the war were forbidden from doing too much of defense. Japan, Germany, and Italy. They could have dual-use technology, but not out-and-out defense technology. So you will not see Japan, Germany, Italy making fighter planes. So winners of the war and losers of the war were two distinct categories. And defense and aerospace go very much hand in hand. Now, China was out of question, so that left us 4. We found that European countries were far more open to the idea of collaboration and cooperation. It happened very well. In fact, so many companies in India have had, I'm also president of the Defense Manufacturer Association. We have more than 500 members. So many, majority of them have European partnerships. So if you see last decade, it will appear that most of the technology transfer was one way. Now we come to the question you ask, will it also start in reverse? I'm happy to say answer is yes. Technology has one very bad habit. It gets old, like most of us. As a result, one decade, you get the technology, and the next decade, that technology is already old. So you have the choice of continuing to develop the technology in your country, and perhaps this time, you are the one who can be a step ahead of someone else. It's like 2G, 3G, 4G, if you remember. I had the distinction of sending the first text message in the country and the first photo message in the country. In the beginning, we got technology from several European countries, well-known names. But by the time a decade passed, India was ahead in most of the mobile technologies. We caught up, and then we went ahead. I'm very happy to say that in many areas of today defense and aerospace, we have caught up with rest of the world, but in many areas we have not. Where we have caught up, stage has come where we have begun to export. Today, actually, India is exporting more than 16,000 crore worth of defense equipment, which is 7 times of what it was 7 years ago. Why it is happening? I'm very happy to say that willingness of European companies to happily partner with India and look at way of supplementing their own scale and capacity. The phrase we often use in this context is that your technology and our scale together is a winning combination. We don't just do make in India, we can do make for the world. So what we make together, a individual country may have a requirement of 10 radars, but you combine it with India's requirement of 100 radars, and the moment you are making 110 radars, you are ready to export to rest of the world also. So answer to your question is yes, it is increasingly becoming a two-way traffic. And I do believe that with geopolitical situation with respect to both China and Russia, Europe will see increasing merit in partnering with India. And India, as far as India is concerned, we had seen that merit 10 years ago when we said who will happily transfer technology, work with us. We saw that Europe was a very, very open partner in that respect.
I think the launch of the Chandrayaan mission successfully by India also, I think, opened the eyes of a lot of Western world now to say that India is not something to be taken too lightly, even in the field of science and technology anymore. Yeah. Proud moment for us, yeah. Mr. Kaustubh, coming to the talent question, it's common to hear Indians go abroad for higher education and careers, and generally it is the developed Western nations, US, Europe, etc., that draws most Indian talent. However, India doesn't seem to have developed into a very attractive destination for most foreign nations, despite Indian educated talent being recognized abroad very much. The quality of premier Indian IITs, IIMs, Indian Institute of Science is recognized as world class, but yet we don't see that many people coming from outside into India for education or careers. You have been a partner for Skill India as well as a healthcare consultant for upgradation of NEET to IIM Mumbai. What are your thoughts on India promoting itself as a destination for attracting talent from the EU for education and careers?
So honestly, that's not a very easy question, actually, Mr. Molly. But I think in my recent experience trying to convert across NEET to actually, say IIM Mumbai, I think there are a couple of things that we are trying to work on because we are now fortunate to build it from scratch. I think the first realization is that there are a lot of, I would say, already developed forums or platforms or courses which are already there between both the partners, which are not understood, informed, or aware. For example, if we take across something like the Erasmus course, which is there, the Erasmus course is a course between EU and India, and it is of two types. One is the Erasmus Modulum and the Erasmus Plus. The Erasmus Modulus is about a joint master's degree, which will be given by both the partners, where students have to spend across time in the territories of both the partners to not just understand innovation and quality aspect that the EU gives, but also real life problems that a developing country like say India offers. And they have to have across a kind of a course in which there is 3 months of absolute theory to practical conversion that needs to happen with a project to be done in both the countries. Now, unfortunately, if I was to really ask across students in both the countries, I think there's a lot. Do you really know about Erasmus Modulum across? I'm not too sure whether the answer would be really yes. The second is also about Erasmus Plus. Now, Erasmus Plus, which has been done, is not just around education, but also around sports, arts, and a lot of all-round development, which is more a cross-cultural pollination of students and professionals moving from one territory to the other. Again, I think a lot needs to be done by across this August forum in creating across that kind of education and knowledge. I also look upon this as a responsibility of various companies. I think, and I come from my experience in terms of healthcare, but where I've seen across a lot of good work happening in terms of internships and apprenticeships for young professionals of EU to come to India across and to do across, whether it is in their Indian affiliates, whether it is a partnership with one of the Indian companies, but to do across a kind of a 3-month project across that happens and where they're able to contribute over to that organization, to the country across and go back with far more, I would say, enrichment of how the Global South works. It's also time, I think, and I was recently in the G20 as well, where there was a lot of discussion which happened on where senior leaders will also be asked to do across a lot of reskilling and upskilling in the post-COVID world, because I think one of the realizations is that while I think a lot of leaders have risen across to positions of power and responsibility, but at the same time, technology has leapfrogged several decades. And I think it's time for all of us to either shape up or ship out. And I think that's where a lot of leadership is being asked to take across, exposure, to take across preceptorship programs across both, sides of, say EU as, and say India, and to really be there in both of these territories, and where a lot of EU leaders will be coming over to India to take across a kind of two things. One is kind of projects that will help India. Second, sabbatical oriented work, which they will do with organizations like the UN to really also contribute over to the country and the community. And the third thing which is happening across is a lot of teacher training programs in which a lot of teachers will also be coming over to India as a part of Learn in India and Learn in India, Make in India, Build India across. So there is a lot of cross-country and a cross-partnership collaboration which is happening. We in the IIMs and the IITs are really trying to build across courses which can help it. And in fact, there are modules today which are available in 26 different languages, which can be taken by professionals in the EU and students on a lot of courses, be it in terms of resilience of supply chains, in terms of digital interactivity, in terms of AI, which are already available. And I think those can be really made really fruitful. Thank you so much.
I just want to add a couple of points which you mentioned, and we're seeing that even in companies. 5 to 10 until 5 to 10 years back, India in a lot of companies used to be considered a hardship posting. Now it's considered a more desired place where a lot of people want to actually know about what's happening in a country like India. That suddenly, that India is at the cusp of growth, and the kind of growth that we're seeing, focus on technology, what India has done in a lot of things. So that's one change that has happened. That does, and to your question on what is preventing a lot of students from coming here, it's not so much the quality of education, it's actually more the narrative and we have around infrastructure, safety. That is a bigger aspect. And so for us, it's less about the quality of education, it's actually about addressing some of those things that actually come in the way, particularly on undergraduate, graduate education.
Correct. I think the quality of life that we can offer in our country, there is still work to be done there, which can make India more attractive. I mean, everybody recognizes India as a big marketplace. They see the trade opportunities. They see the talent that is in India, but to be able to attract outside world to come in and settle down in India for careers or education, we still have to improve things on the infrastructure, quality of life, etc. Yeah. So actually, taking this cue, actually, as Mr. Piyush Goyal said also in his speech, the establishment of the Trade and Technology Council with involvement at very senior ministerial level between India and EU actually shows this high intent now from both sides. Mr. Shukla, question to you. How do you see this, the establishment of the Trade and Technology Council, as a catalyst for the potential transformation of the cooperation between the two?
Oh, technology is my favorite subject. We talked about technology being one way or two way, and I did respond that first 10 years, I saw it happening one way in both telecom as well as in defense. And then the reverse started. Very important, there are, if you look at 3 of the Trade Technology Councils, first one focuses on higher level of technology, quantum computing, and areas of that nature. India has inherently a very good advantage that we have the necessary manpower which is skilled in this domain. Second council, which focuses on environment, many areas connected with environment, renewable energy, green technology, this entire gamut of carbon credits. How do we have carbon-less manufacturing, net zero emissions? Again, India has taken the lead, and the lead was formally established, if I remember right, in 2016, when Prime Ministers commenced the solar mission and caught the global attention. And this happened in UN, but the mission was launched in Paris. I remember I was with him that day. The solar mission, followed by entire focus on renewable energy. If you look at the goals from Paris Accord, India has been the only large economy which has actually met all its goals and surpassed them. No other country has done that. Now, these are the things where EU and India see very much eye to eye. So both in the first Trade Technology Council and the second Trade Technology Council, what we are seeing is we have moved ahead with co-development of technologies. It is beyond technology transfer from one to another. Whether it is quantum computing, whether it is green energy, whether green technologies, whether it is renewable energy, we are talking about co-development of technologies which will serve the world. Besides India and EU, they will serve the world. And that framework is getting developed through these councils. Fourth one is focusing, of course, on the trade. Third one is focusing on trade and investment. It again links back to the first two. If we talk about environment, and it was discussed in B20, to meet the goals, the world needs $5 trillion of investment in next decade. In the coming decade, $5 trillion looks a humongous number. But when you look at all the money sloshing around in the financial system in the world, actually $5 trillion is doable in 10 years. We are talking about $500 billion a year. World has enough money sloshing around. It has to be directed towards the right cause. And once again, EU-India Council working in that goal is going to find ways in our bilateral framework, both for co-development of technology as well as developing framework that the finance can be directed in the right direction. So I'm very hopeful that this trade technology councils, free trade area will remain a vexed area. That I know that is a tough task ahead. But these three are, as you said, meeting midway. A lot of progress can be made on many areas, and keeping the most complex area in parallel, that we will tackle it one by one. Thank you.
And I think it is through these trade technology councils that probably the FTA will also be sort of, in a way, dealt with in a way. I mean, opening the doors for getting through an FTA of some sorts going forward. I mean, maybe some contingent items may be left out, etc. This topic is such that we could go on for a long time, but I have just got a message from the organizers saying that we are running out of time. So I would like to close this discussion at this stage on a note of optimism and hope. And the hope is that going forward, in a few years' time, I've done this panel discussion on similar themes. This is my third one. And each time when I do it, I feel more hopeful that we are closer to increased ties between India and Europe. So I'm sure it will happen. The recent announcement in the G20 summit about the formation of the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, involving sea routes, railways, roadways, all the way from Europe to India. I think it's a step in that direction, and it will help promote trade, at least in that